If you're the kind of person who wants a UPS that actually lets you keep your servers humming when the lights flicker, without spending a fortune on something that looks great on paper but trips up when you need it most, you're in the right place. The big question most people ask themselves is, will this thing really protect my gear and stay out of my way, or am I just adding another box to my rack that gathers dust? That hesitation makes a lot of sense. There are enough online reviews that talk about wattage numbers and sine wave claims to drown anyone trying to decide whether a $2,500 unit is worth the spend. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What I tried to get clear before recording this review was the day-to-day reality of running a 6000VA 5400W online double conversion UPS in a typical small to medium business rack. I dug through the specs, skimmed the few user comments that exist, and imagined the scenarios most IT admins face: a short brownout while migrating a VM, a sudden power surge when the building's HVAC kicks on, or just the normal wear and tear of a 3U unit that's always plugged into the same outlet. The Eaton Tripp Lite SU6000RTMB isn't just a list of numbers, it's a set of decisions that affect how you actually keep your equipment alive. First off, the most obvious advantage is the pre-installed maintenance bypass switch. In many UPS models, you have to add a bypass module after the fact, which means extra cabling, extra downtime, and a higher chance of miswiring. With the SU6000RTMB, the bypass is built right in, so if you ever need to service your UPS or replace a failed battery, you can route power directly around the unit without pulling the plug on everything else. In a real-world rack where you might have a handful of switches, a storage array, and a small hypervisor all sharing that single UPS, that built-in bypass can mean the difference between a graceful switchover and a full-blown outage. The online double conversion design is another piece that matters beyond the headline pure sine wave claim. In practice, it means the unit constantly conditions the incoming AC, delivering a clean, regulated output regardless of fluctuations on the grid. For devices that are sensitive to voltage spikes, think network switches, high-performance storage controllers, or any gear that runs 24/7. This constant regulation cuts down on the subtle wear that can shorten component life. I've seen administrators complain that even a small undervoltage event can cause a server to reboot, which in turn can corrupt databases. The SU6000RTMB's ability to smooth those changes out gives you a safety net that you won't notice until something goes wrong elsewhere. Now, let's talk about the actual capacity. 6000VA sounds massive, but the usable wattage cap's at 5400W, and that's the realistic limit you can draw before the UPS starts to droop. In a typical SMB setup, a couple of 1U servers at 300W each, a switch cluster at 100W, and maybe a backup NAS at 250W will sit well under that ceiling, leaving you enough headroom for spikes or temporary load spikes when you spin up additional VMs. The extended run rating, how long the batteries will hold the load after a loss, depends heavily on the actual wattage you're pulling. If you're close to the 5400W mark, you'll get roughly 5 to 6 minutes of backup, enough to shut down gracefully. If you're pulling a more modest 1500W, you could see 20 minutes or more. That's where the value really shines. You're paying for a UPS that can sustain a real, varied load, not just a static test bench figure. Who should buy this thing? If you have a dedicated rack, run any mission-critical workloads, and you need a single UPS that can handle both power conditioning and battery backup without the hassle of external bypass modules, the SU6000RTMB is a solid fit. It especially makes sense for small data centers, lab environments, or even a high-end home office where you're hosting virtualization platforms and want that extra layer of protection. The built-in network card also lets you monitor the unit remotely, so you can get alerts on battery health, load, and temperature without having to climb into the server room every day. For anyone who already uses a network-managed UPS solution, that remote view is a real time saver. On the flip side, if you're a hobbyist with a single Windows box or a modest media server, you probably don't need the 6000VA capacity or the double conversion complexity. A cheaper line interactive UPS would likely cover your needs and cost a fraction of the price. Likewise, if you already have a redundant power infrastructure like a dual-feed UPS or a separate generator, adding the SU6000RTMB may be overkill, especially if you're tight on budget. Let's get into some of the practical weaknesses that show up after you unbox the unit. First, the size. At 3U, it takes up a whole row of rack space, and the front panel is fairly deep. If your rack is already cramped, you might need to shuffle other equipment around to make room. That's not